want to share with you real quick about the power of prayer, praying for somebody's salvation. I want to tell you through a testimony of a young man that back in the 90s, in this young man's early 20s, he was an angry young man. He was angry at the world. He was angry at himself. He was angry at everybody. And even though he claimed that he didn't even believe in God, he was angry at God. And, his mom was active and involved within a church, and she passed away. October the 31st, she passed away. And so that young man asked the pastor of that church to do his mom's funeral, and so he graciously did. And a few days later they had that funeral, and at the graveside that young man walked up to the pastor and tried to give that pastor some money for doing that service, and that pastor refused the money. He said, bring it to church. And that young man said, no, I don't do church. I don't do that kind of stuff. I don't want to have anything to do with God. Angry at God, especially since his mom, who was a Christian, had now passed away, even though he said he didn't believe in God, was angry at God. And so that young man went to turn and walk away. There that pastor grabbed that young man by the arm, turned him around, very sternly but lovingly looked at that young man eye to eye and said, I'm going to pray for you until you get saved, until you give your heart and life to Jesus Christ. Well, that young man turned away and was furious, just flew out of that graveside, just flew out of that parking lot, just absolutely furious of what that pastor had the nerve and the gall to say to him. I want to tell you what, his mom passed away October the 31st, December the 26th of 1996 of that same exact year, a different pastor came and knocked on the door of that young man's house and asked him if he was to die right now, where would he spend eternity? And that young man told that pastor that he had no doubt that he'd spend eternity in hell. And that young man was saved that very night. Saved, set free, and gloriously set on fire for Jesus Christ. Became a preacher, became a pastor, became an evangelist, became a soul winner. You say, well, how do you know so much about that young man? Because that young man was me. And that pastor that prayed for me was Brother Larry Lastly. And he's still praying for me this very day because he's a prayer warrior, a man of God that believes in the power of prayer. So I want to tell you something. If you know somebody that's a lost, if they're a drug addict, if they're, embittered in anger and all of those things, put them before the throne. The Bible says that the prayers of a righteous man availeth much. That man prayed for me, and several days later I was saved. Who are you praying for?